It is my pleasure to introduce Judy Thomas, the Director of the Medical Specialty Division at Children's Nebraska. Her passion for transformational leadership, shared governance, and change management started early in her career as she led multiple units teams through the journey of engagement, retention, recruitment, strategic planning, and positive outcomes. We are lucky to have her with us today to talk about ambulatory care setting and growth strategic planning. Let's all welcome Judy.
Thanks, Anne. Get the pleasure of working with Anne a lot, so I love it. So appreciate you, and thank you for inviting me today. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. If not, Anne would have already alerted me I'm taking it. So you guys, I'm really excited. Growth and strategic plan. It's just one of my most favorite things. But one thing you're going to hear me talk quite a bit about throughout the whole thing is very much the importance of using change management. Change management is highly important at anything you do that's going to evolve around change. So great. So, guys, here's kind of the agenda I'm looking towards wanting to work through. And I know a couple on the call who in our GI department have actually worked with me some on strategic planning. So it'll be interesting if they want to chime in at all. So I do want to kind of talk about the definition. Strategic planning can mean a lot of different things. So I really want to talk through that first, and then really the why. Why is it important for us as divisions and specialties to think about strategic planning? And then honestly, if you don't understand why things fail, it's hard to actually create a productive product at the end. So you have to poke holes. You have to understand what are you trying to avoid so that you can make the best product possible. And that's with any project you do, honestly. I, as the director for medical specialties, have a lot of oversight over our medical specialty divisions where I do a lot of projects and work with a lot of team members. But I don't ever do anything alone. And as leaders, we don't ever do anything alone. And we have to make sure we always involve the people and the right people. So it is key that I want to talk about the role of the leader. We as leaders can set a really good stage, but we can also set a really bad stage. I bet you all of us can probably think of people in our world or projects we've been involved in. And you're like, why am I here? Is this ever going to end? Are we ever going to get to the end of this? Those things happen. So strategic planning, we really want to make sure it's a methodical process, but that we understand our role as a leader as well. Managing change, I will talk about that quite a bit. It's a very big passion of mine. So managing people through change is a highly important task, and probably one of the most important tasks you can do. And then key stakeholders, that's going to go completely along with managing change. You need to have the right people, the right time at the table. When you don't have that at the end of the day, you are not going to get where you need to go. And I'm sure probably all of you would probably give this thumbs up that this has happened to you. I'm sure every one of you has actually had something come your way and you're like, where did that come from? Who decided? And how did they think this was going to work? I think everybody has had that happen. And that is what you do not want to have happen in any project you do, let alone strategic planning. So I am going to share with you though, a model we use here that we've developed. And I'll give some really good examples on how you fill it out as well within it. So it's kind of somewhat made up, somewhat not, with the words that are in there. So let's first start with the definition with strategic planning. With strategic planning, really basically, strategic planning in healthcare refers to the process of defining an organization's direction and making decisions that align with its long-term goals. This is very important to do. To be able to align with the long-term goals of your organization will help you be successful. If you don't do that, executive teams are not going to buy in to help break down barriers and help you get to your end result. So aligning with your actual strategic plan of your organization, their strategic goals, will be key. And when you really think about strategic planning, it is actually the result of a strategic initiative when you think about that, but you can't just wait for things to happen, right? You're not waiting for things just to happen and hope things just work its way out. It is such an uncontrollable market force out there. And sometimes we get lucky, right? And the product or service is an instant hit. Like it's just, yes, it worked. This is great. That can happen. But really, most of the time, we have to create the growth plan ahead of time and then really create an implementation plan within it. So as we continue to think about strategic planning, here's the why, right? This is where when you think about increasing revenue, a lot of times that's what we think about in an organization. But we have to think of our market share. You cannot make something happen if the market's not even there. If it's not even there for you to even gain, if you already have 99% of the market, that's not going to be helpful for you to gain more of the market. So you have to really think about what you're looking for. And then access to care. If you're going to market or you're going to be strategically planning around something, if you can't even get the patients in tomorrow or the next week or within the next month, that's a really difficult thing to be successful in. So you need to think about how you can create access to the care. And you have to think of how you'll sustain it. We've all seen things come and go. Yeah, I'm sure it's always like, what's the flavor of the month? I think I've heard that a lot, right? What's the flavor of the month? And so how are you going to sustain it and get that buy-in? That's where change management comes in as well. And then there is some profitability because you need to increase that revenue and that profitability to then be able to reinvest back in an organization. Even if you're not for profit, you still are gaining revenue to put back in your organization. So when you just see the word increased revenue, though, please don't think about that as being overall profitability. Because if you're not strategic about it, where you understand your expenses, your market, your access, it's going to fail. And you will actually do something that's going to cost the organization more money. So you need to really think about that. So it's not always build it, they will come, right? Even though we're the only freestanding children's hospital, we can't even do that because you can't just build it, they will come. There's other competitors around us that people can go to. So it's a very intentional process that once you begin it, you need to do ongoing review, check-ins, and there's changes and updates actually throughout it. Once you start it, you will probably find at the very end, it changed multiple times throughout within it. So what's kind of really important to think about too is strategic planning can originate in a lot of different places, depending on what you're doing from a strategic plan purpose. Where I came from the inpatient arena. I was in the inpatient arena for the majority of my career, where I led multiple units. But when I got into specialty care a number of years ago, wow, my eyes were wide open. So I don't know how many others are in specialty care like I am, and a few others, and Ann Thallos, who was just talking. But it's a very unique area when you're in the specialty environment. You really find that you're leading a lot of strategic planning. And that strategic planning, though, can be an inpatient world as well, can start in primary care and surgical and procedural. My primary focus I'm going to do today is a little bit more how we started in a specialty care setting. But honestly, you can use this information anywhere. And so because any area, you can actually do that. So we will work through kind of how to start that. And then how does it go across through the pipeline as well? And when I mean pipeline, when you do strategic planning, it is not just in your area. Strategic planning normally affects multiple areas. So as specialty care, we have to think of that pipeline. If we're going to start a new service, who you're going to work with? Primary care is very important to the world. Without primary care, where's our resource for our referral base? Right? They tend to come from that area. So we got to engage primary care as we start creating the strategies and the objectives that we'll talk about later. And so we've got to look across that whole continuum of care, not just our one area. So if you're in surgical services, you have to think, well, shoot, if I do that, will they have inpatient beds to even be able to help us? And if we do that and it's always on Mondays and they need to stay the night, will that work in our inpatient service? What if they need home care? This might be a population. How are you dealing with home care? You have to think of all of those pieces and take your patient and that process, what new process you're going to do through the entire care model. That's going to help make sure you involve all the right people. So you got to look around that. And it all depends on those strategies and objectives you're looking at. You need to understand who will be impacted, like we just talked about, and need to process all those key stakeholders that you will need to involve from the very beginning. Everyone has seen this before, but please don't think that you sit back at a table and you work with this core group of people and you're so excited, you go through a journey yourselves and you can't wait to roll it out. You put it tight in this bow and you say, look at what we're going to do, everybody, jump on board. You will hit a major brick wall, even if you think it's the best thing you've ever seen. They are not on the journey with you and they are not going to buy in right away. That can happen with any project. So I'm going to talk a little bit later here about the change management part that will be important when you do any project, especially within change management. So those things you want to think. Also, no area is ever isolated, right? Never. And so you have to think there's going to be somebody impacted. So now let's kind of move a little bit into how and why things can fail in strategic planning. This is important to do in any project you look at or anything that occurs. You have to understand what could happen, because if you understand that, you know what to make sure you include and to make sure that you make part of your entire process and make it very systematic. So if we have lack of alignment to organizational mission, vision, and strategies, that can actually help you fail. Because what will happen is you don't get buy-in from strategic leaders, you don't get buy-in from the organization, and therefore you can't, and try hard, but you cannot get buy-in from the other areas because you're going to hit brick walls that's not matching to where the organization sees themselves going. So make sure you're really aligning that. If you fail to include key stakeholders, you now don't have the buy-in, you don't have those people there that really need to be involved. It's very, very important to understand that, because you need ownership. And when you have lack of ownership, things fail. People aren't owning it. They're not making sure it happens. They're not following it. They're not keeping an eye on it. And they're not including all the right people. So you've got to make sure you have someone who's owning all different pieces of your strategic plan. Poor communication. I think everybody's seen that in any project sometimes. If we have poor communication, well, it just falls through the loop. It's almost like it became last month's thing to do. And this month it's gone because we're not communicating effectively. And especially if you have slow adoption, people burn out about it. They just kind of forget about it. So you can't have that. So it's very important to understand at the core of these planning challenges that you always do, that before you dive into the actual creation of strategic planning, understand these things. Because one of the most difficult aspects of strategic planning is the process of developing and implementing a plan that's both effective and adaptable, that people can actually do it and be part of it. So it requires a deep understanding, you guys, of the business environment. So if you're not business savvy and don't understand that, you've got to involve your business people. I always thought as a nurse, I would never get to the business side of things, but I'll tell you what, it's a lot of fun. And our clinical knowledge is so helpful in these situations. So really make sure that you do this so that you can make informed decisions that are based on atypical data, right? You need the data and the insights. We always use data, even in these situations, because when you lack that alignment, remember, you're going to lose what the organization is really shooting for in the beginning. So let's go ahead and let's move on to the role, which your role is. You're all leaders that have joined us or aspiring to be. And so being a leader is so amazing. But I will tell you, there's leading and there's managing people. And leading people is exactly where you want to be. Change management, you guys, and I will talk about more here in a second, which is coming up next, actually. It's a journey that you have got to take people on. This is something you should be doing almost every day of your career. So if anyone's going to be impacted by something you're thinking or doing or getting ready to do, you've got to involve them. That is so key to avoid strategic failures. Your role is to avoid those strategic failures. Not including those stakeholders is when you're going to run into lack of ownership, poor communication, slow adoption, all of those things. So please just don't manage the situation. Lead people down it. Lead people towards that change. Let people be creative and think outside the box and differently. Who cares if it's out there and it's crazy? Write it down. Let those juices flow. Let them just talk. This is important. This is not where you state what things are going to happen, how we're going to do things. It's an open communication line you're going to use for a natural discussion, and there's never bad ideas. Strategic planning means you want everyone to speak through it. So, but your goal then, though, is to ensure that what you come up with at the end is matching to your organizational goals. You want to also represent a long-term map. Who do you want to be in 5 years? Who is that? What does that look like for us? And where do you want to be? That's going to drive what you do today. Because if you know what you're going to be, where you want to be in 5 years, you need to understand what you have to do now to get there in 5 years. And that 5-year plan is always ongoing, because after year 1, year 2 becomes now year 1. And now you're pulling out things from that 5-year plan that are going to become year 2. And you're constantly creating that. It's a never-ending strategic plan. Keep change management in the forefront. That is your job, your goal. And really, that is ultimately to avoid those failures in there. So when we start to think about change management, I know a lot of people here at Children's have actually heard me say it about every meeting, probably, to say, let's look, do we have all the right people at the table? And if we don't, we've got to get them here. It is a very structured process to lead people. So really, in truth, what you want to do is organizations actually don't change. The organization does not change ever. It's people change, and we change one person at a time. So you have to focus on the people side of change to be successful. That's what you're working on when you start doing change. I'm sure that most of you have seen one person can change the whole dynamic of a team, and that can happen. And sometimes, and that's okay, but get those right people on your team that are going to be able to bring the right information. You need to understand the shifts that individuals make. This is not a step-by-step methodology of let's do this, then we're going to do that, then we're going to do this. We have to use this from start to finish. So when you kind of use this change management philosophy, you will, I promise you, I have used it so much. You as a leader will sit back and go, okay, what am I going to do next? Because it's flowing, it's going, people bought in, people are excited. You have an overall return on investment that will exceed all business objectives. And it's going to exceed what you want to do. If people impacted by the change don't support the change and aren't involved, they will not engage in it. And now you're going to hit the failures. They've got to be part of the particulars of the change, including new processes, systems, job roles, things of that stuff that you might not think could be infected. Everyone's in a different part of their life. Our work-life balance is different for each and every person. So we have to think about that part. So as you're thinking about going through change management, you guys, I always encourage people, go look up ProSci and the model. It's called ADKAR. And the ADKAR model is an amazing way to really make sure that you engage people in your strategic plan and changes. So create that awareness. This is that need to change. The why. Why do we even need to do this? What's that rationale? Explain it. This will help them work through then what's their why. Now they got to create their own why, like, okay, I get it. They're going to ask questions. You know what? They're going to push back. And I love it when they do that. You know what? People used to just get heart palpitations, right? Where people are like, I don't want to even bring it up because I know they're going to just throw things in. They're going to have this resistance. And so it's like, I love it. I say, throw it at me early, because you know what? You realize you're hearing all the things you need to hear of how you prevent the project from failing now, because you're going to get all that knowledge and you're going to use that knowledge to create a really good product at the end. And you're going to use that to then create the next one, which is desire. Because when they give you all of that, you don't go down the line till you've created awareness, and so you can start creating desire. When you have that, now you got your communication tool. You know how to answer back and say, well, this is how we can work through that. Hey, we could look at this. What are your thoughts how we could do that? You then create desire. And this is where they want to participate and want to support. This is different for each and every person. It really depends on their work-life balance. You have to embrace those differences. and allow for open discussion around this. It will lead to a really great outcome. Knowledge, you cannot even start knowledge, which is how to change, unless you've created awareness and desire. If you don't have awareness and desire, please don't move on. Take your time and make sure you have that. Because once you have that, they're open to want to change now, and they will accept the training you give. There's so many times, some of you, I'm sure even educators on here, that you've created and you've like, we taught them. I don't understand this. Why are they not doing this correctly? It's because honestly, they didn't buy in before you taught them. And without buy-in, you can't teach. They're not going to retain it. Okay. So we've got to make sure do that so that change can take place. Now we can create all the knowledge in the world. It's like teaching someone to golf, right? Take the ball, put the golf club down, give it a swing, and it should aim for the hole. But that doesn't necessarily mean they have the ability to make it get in that hole. So that's something you have to think about. So when we're implementing this new skill or behavior, you can't just teach it. We've got to practice, right? Before it's completely initiated. Don't initiate it, think it's just going to happen tomorrow. So monitor it, set reasonable goals and metrics, adjust, process, right? And figure out what you might need to do a little different to make sure all can do what you need to do. The other thing too is ability. When you start to think about ability, this is the actual ability to implement the change. So to implement these new skills and behaviors, you've got to continue those practice sessions and monitor that feedback. You need the reinforcement. One of the things that most projects will fail, and so will your strategic plan, if you don't reinforce to sustain the change or sustain what you're doing. So you got to monitor it, keep it in front mind. Don't think it's going great, and then just stop looking at it. You got to wait till you get to that desired outcome and make sure it's ingrained. Use positive feedback, rewards, recognition, encouragement, whatever you need to do. Again, I will reiterate, mitigating resistance is so important to have. You need the resistance. You want people to tell you. It's very normal. It's actually a very proactively planned phase, but it's a proactive core element to your success. Your goal is not to eliminate it, but to anticipate it, work with it, and mitigate it. Mitigate the consequences of that information. That's going to allow you to really get to the best product at the end. So again, if you don't do this, you will have a persistent threat, a 100% persistent threat to your success to this. So before I move on to my next slide, just remember this should be occurring in every project you do. Even if it's a small project, a no-brainer one, doesn't matter. If someone's impacted, involve people from that area. You don't need to involve the whole team necessarily if it's too big, but at least some key players that go back to their team. So now we start to go into strategic planning and like who should really be involved in that. Well, you need to think to yourself, who's the decision makers of the practice? So if I want to improve access for ENT and grow our ENT business because our market share, let's say, is 45%, well, I need to think who are those decision makers, within that practice to help lead the strategic planning. I need them to lead it with me. I don't lead it myself, right? As the leader, and I want them to lead it with me. And think about anyone impacted for the goals, strategies, and objectives that you come up with. Those will be very, very important down the line when you talk about those. So then you have to think then of the cross continuum care, right? The entire process, who's going to be impacted, and you want to map that out. That will be very helpful if you map that out. That's going to tell you that along your way, these are going to be key players. And when you start finding key players, you're actually going to find more and more because others are going to bring others to the table to tell you, wait a minute, this is actually someone else that's going to be impacted. And why you do that is what you want to do is with change management, you take people on the journey from the moment you're thinking of an idea to the end. Because that thinking of the idea is where all the critical thinking starts happening, and you want the key players involved from the beginning. So that's why you start change management the moment you're thinking of a new process. So for me, when I was creating a strategic plan in which how I work over here, we have a strategic planning committee, a division that actually helps us. We have division leaders like myself, and we have an executive team. we have our providers that are very key players and our clinical team, right? Who's in the clinic. We've got to all come together because this for us is a whole process. Then when we get to objectives is when we started pulling in all the different players across the continuum of who could be involved to help us get to our end result of our strategic plan. So strategic planning division, if you probably have one in your organization, but if not, here's a little bit about what strategic planning division can help you with. And you probably have something similar, but strategic planning, they oversee like our logistics and operations of strategic planning and really are great at the researching and analyzing and interpreting data for us out in the community and regionally for us too, right? So they can monitoring the hospital health, care environment, market, competitor information. So they can continually identify opportunities or even threats or there's trends that really can help support what we want to do within there. They will analyze and evaluate highly complex business and market data and interpret it for you and work with you with that. They are responsible for the collection of all the market share, like we were just talking about, and then analyze the metrics. They will help poke holes in your business plan because they are not living and breathing within your area. So they'll ask questions, and it's an amazing team to have that you can involve to really help you understand that part of it. So then as you continue to move forward and you think about each step of division planning now. So when you think about that strategic planning, you are first going to want to start walking through these main steps, right? You do a kickoff, division retreat, you kind of make a draft. After the division retreat, you make a draft. And once that draft is made, your executive team, just your immediate executive team gets involved because you want them to be able to review it and ask questions, poke holes in it. And then you go back and you refresh it and put it back together. Then you go to the strategy council. Every organization usually has some sort of a strategy council or a strategy executive team, and then presenting there. And again, they'll give feedback. And then you will go back and forth, potentially once or twice, because you will make some changes in there if you need to. And then we get approval at the end and then implement. But I'm going to dive into each one of these steps for you because they're very important. And we try to get through them really within 4 to 6 weeks, which seems like a lofty thing. But what you don't want to do is have that slow mo, and you at least want to get your strategic plan outlined and approved so you can start working on it in 4 to 6 weeks. So your kickoff, when you go to kick this off, your division leadership will be involved with your strategic planning. And for us here, it's directors, our division chiefs, we work very closely with, our division administrator, and our manager of the clinic. So we're very, very much a team in there. So depending on your organization, involve that core leadership team to start with, and then your strategy team. And what you'll do is you're going to review and understand what is the organizational core elements of their vision, mission, values. You've got to keep that in your forefront. And what are the long-term, short-term goals for the organization? Because you want yours to round up and help the organization get there. So your goals match their goals. So whatever those outcomes are, you're helping the organization meet their ultimate goals. And then create an agenda during this for the division retreat. And so you really want to understand those pieces. So you can then kick off the division retreat and meet with all of that team in there. So then when you get within the division retreat, we talked already kind of who to include. So I just kind of went over that. And you will find that in that division retreat, you will now be adding beyond just the initial people we talked about with division leaders, but we're going to start now having clinical staff, providers. We honestly, within one of the departments, we had a half-day retreat and we did not have clinic that half day. And for the most, now some of them, they had maybe half the staff stayed for clinic. So it kind of just depended, but we did a full retreat and we talked about current state and really started through the whole why, right? We use change management. What's the purpose? Why strategic planning? and then started reviewing just more the mission vision, and they just to really help understand where we want to go for the organization, and actually ask people, what does our current state look like? Who are we today? And think, where do you think we should be in 5 years? And we want to then define our division vision, right? And our 5-year strategic goal. And then when we start to think that way, you can take that 5 years and break it down into, well, what are we going to have to do today? You know, right now, this year, next year, what are all the goals and rationale? What are all the goals we need to do? And then when you think about goals and how to do this, one of the things that can work really well is we know some people are more outspoken than others, is you want everyone to feel they have a voice. So create and put big sticky note sheets up, and you give everyone post-it notes and say, what do you guys think we should do? What are all those different strategies we could work on? What are the different kind of goals and different rationales we can look at? So you're going to think of all of those things. And once they start putting all their goals on there and list each one. And one thing that can be helpful is you list your organizational goals. Like we have 5 goals here. So you can list all 5 goals across, and then under each goal, say, put a sticky note. And what do you think we could do in our division to help get and reach this goal? How can we make ourselves better? And you put all those post-it notes. And then you take those post-it notes and you kind of group them together, right? And get your themes out. Well, once you get those themes, you now have to think about, well, we have our goals, but what's our rationale? Why are we thinking this? Why is it we think we should do that goal? That's that rationale you want to get to, which I will show you on another page here and how that fits in. But you want those rationales of the why do you think that's a good goal? And when you get to the why we think that's a good goal, then you get to develop, well, how are we going to measure that, right? How would we even measure that goal? How will we know we're successful? So your 3 things you want to get out of that meeting is, what do they think we have for goals? What's our why behind those goals? And then how are we going to measure those goals in our, in our indicators there? So ultimately, those strategies are going to help us then look towards the information we're going to need to pull together when we start thinking strategies of how to actually meet those goals. We do not say yes or no to anything in these meetings. We just encourage conversation. And then what happens after that retreat, the division chief leaders, the division administrator, and basically our strategic planning leadership team actually meets to then, during that meeting, we have weekly meetings and we compile the information. And we take those strategic initiatives that they brought up from goals and strategies and rationale, and we put it into a format for everyone to then review, and we send it back to the team that was part of our strategic planning and allow them to come back and let us know is there anything we missed. So here's an example of what it looks like when you do something like this after. So basically you have your goals, right? What will we do? Well, this is where we came up with, most people were thinking, well, we need to make sure, that our team is engaged. We want to make sure that we are, have the best talent. How do we retain our talent? These were a bunch of the post-it notes, right? So what those post-it notes allowed us to do is say, well, we got to really elevate our team experience. All of these have that in common. So those sticky notes give you that ultimate goal. But then we had to ask, well, why do we need to do this? Why do we need to elevate this team? And that became our rationale. Then when you go to the next column, it's like, well, how are we going to measure that we actually meet that goal? And that's when we came up with making sure, achieve 3-year retention. And we looked at APP, providers, clinical staff. You want the whole team, but that's what you want to focus on. And then on your right side, which helps your executive team, is, and like I mentioned earlier, we have 5 goals for our strategic plan. And this number 1 aligns to goal 1, 4, and 5 of the actual strategic plan of the organization. This is a 1-pager that helps your executive team. The other thing you want to think about here is you can put it in this format along with it. So this one then pulled out the strategies. So those 5 goals that were listed on this page on the left side are put in these 5 bubbles. So you have your organization's mission. Then you actually have, what did your team come up with? Maybe they came up with a specific vision for the group. And then we have our strategic goals there. And then what are the strategies? And remember, when you think about strategies, this is really coming down to that, how are we going to get there, right? What are things that we're going to need? Well, we're going to need transparency of data sharing. We have to expand our regional reach, right? So these are all the different strategies we came up with that we know as leaders, we have to figure out how to do. So these two slides end up going to the executive leadership for review. All those two slides. This is where you prep at a time. You want your division chief engaged. You want them to speak, want them to be part of it, and you as a leader speak as well. And when you present, but you practice first, because you want to make sure when you present, it's very methodical. So you present what's on those slides, and then you listen to feedback. And when you start listening to feedback, you're writing down notes, you take it all in. And usually this executive leadership for us, it's our VPs of primary and ambulatory care, and also inpatient care, so that they all can hear and ask questions. You end up meeting again back with your main leadership team and take all that they gave you and make changes where needed. Then you go to strategy council with a draft. And if you made any changes that you know will affect your original team, you need to make sure you go back and talk with them as well. Again, you do the same thing, prep beforehand, have a discussion, work through it. Now you'll present, you're going to listen to that feedback, and there might be some time that you need to make some changes. So you really want to ensure approval, with your VP executive team before you head to your strategy council. Because usually it goes through pretty smoothly when you've done that. And especially if they align with the organization's mission, vision, and values. That's when you'll really get there. So as you're meeting again, you might have gotten some more feedback and they may ask you come back again, and that's okay. So you've got to make some changes, go back, or you make changes and you send it in for final approval. So you have a strategic planning meeting where you're going to edit your plan. And now what you're going to do is you are going to take it to the next step. So you did not dive into all the little pieces yet because you wanted to not go into your objectives, which is the how you will actually accomplish your strategies, because you need to now start diving into the team of how this is going to now happen. And we have to think of what will work with the team. And so this is now the how. But you don't want to go here till they've approved your strategies. That's very important. And so now, when you start meeting with your team, and you will come up with these as a team and then compile them. This is an example of what that looks like. So you can see the strategies, that those 7 strategies are now listed on the left side. And you can see we put them into what do we know we could accomplish in those 7 strategies this year, and what do we think we would accomplish in 2025. These objectives are going to come from a lot of discussion you had earlier with your team. You're going to start filling this in. You're going to see that some things are in green, because what you want to do is when you get ready to go to strategy council to do a final sign off on the whole strategic plan, you want to call out things you're going to want to know they will support, that you actually are going to need assistance. You're going to need assistance from them to say, yes, we're good with you doing this, so you can make your business plan for it and move forward. That's going to be important. So what you'll notice under the objectives, you can see it's now really specific information. Ones that are tangible, you can act on and actually do. It's not kind of high level anymore. So one says like start quality and transparency updates, establish an operations council. They're very specific objectives, right? It's that how, it's the solutions to it. Now you'll notice in the far right, you have our divisional goals there now. Now that we've created our 5 divisional goals, what goals are those aligning to? And then what goals are they aligning to for your overall strategic plan for the organization? Very important to have this for everyone to be able to see and how it matches through. You will do a lot of analysis and vetting, okay, during this time as well. And because we talked about our objectives and our KPIs, but you actually have to make sure that you're really thinking about that time. So you're scheduling meetings, working through the areas on this slide here. This is where you want to make sure with change management, you are thinking of anyone impacted if we establish this operations council, who would have to be involved. And whoever you list and whatever then you have to start meetings with them and start saying, are you buying into this? Can this work for you in 2024? And if they're like, yes, it's like, great, we're keeping it on our strategic plan. If they say no, and the key players you need, you have to move it to 2025. You need to work with people impacted here. So during that time, you schedule meetings, you break off, you ask, and you vet it through. You've got to do that. Then once you know that the people impacted, we know we can do these in 2024, you need to think of your baseline and your target for your KPIs, your key performance indicators, ensure you have benchmarks for them. You have to make sure you have a champion. You have to have an owner. Don't go into those failures. Got to have a great timeline. Please make it a right timeline. If you don't make that, things fail. So if you got to move things, move them. And that's important to do. So then you go back to that same format we just had. Okay, and you can see now we took all of those KPIs off that last one and we listed them here. We didn't list our objectives on this one, but now we're going to list who's our champion, who's our physician champion for each one of these 5 goals. And then what is our baseline data for previous year? And it could be 0. And then what are we, where we are currently? And where do we hope to be in our 5-year plan, which is 2028. So this is important that you look at and you keep track. As you think of strategic planning, right? This is where you are prepping now for strategy council, where you're going to take that previous 2 forms that you've now made really good objectives with, and you now have outcome data to show where you are currently and where you want to be. You now want to revamp, identify where you might need help. So you've done those things. Now you need to create that roadmap. And I'll show you what this little roadmap looks like, that you keep highlighted those items you want their support on and know they can support, so you can create business plans, which you also, before you go meet with strategy council, it's so important to do it SBARs on the ones that you think they might have questions on. If they're going to have questions on things that you're thinking about, create SBARs. That SBAR is going to help you make sure that you can answer questions and you're prepped and ready of the why, right? SBARs really help explain your situation, your background, really all your why in there. Update that strategic roadmap. It's going to really include all the way through your 5 years. And then you're going to run through that presentation. So let me show you, when you think about that 5-year strategy plan, I've talked about that quite a bit. But this is what's so important to know what you're aiming for. So that 5-year plan's always going to be a 5-year plan. And what I mean about that is, if you look here, this took things from that original one you saw that had all the objectives listed for one. I just put them in a row here. Then you take 2025's goals, list them in a row here. Put the green at the bottom. It's easy to read, easy for strategy council to see it. And then the ones in blue are kind of that 5-year mark of where you're getting. Kind of that 5-year mark that, you know, if you do year 1 and year 2, we know these are the things that we can't wait to get to. So you start making that list now. Anytime someone brings up, oh, if we do this, this will happen, throw it in that 5-year part. That's going to be important. So you end up with this to take to strategy council as well. And this is a sample SBAR I'm just kind of showing you. So in case you want to see one, this is a sample. You would add a little more detail. I took a lot of detail out, so it wasn't so long to be on a slide show. So this is a really great way to just show your project. So you feel you need more information, or you have certain people on strategy council that ask a lot of questions. You can bring them with you and give them a copy if you feel they want it. So these are important to do on those items in green if you feel they are going to need more information and you want to give it to them. All right, we're getting close to wrapping up. So I want to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. So what you want to present to Strategy Council, you're going to present the vision, strategic goals that you have. You want to show them those forms, those KPIs, your strategic and objectives for 2024 to 2025, that strategic roadmap, and any business plans that they ask for or would like in there. So those forms I showed you are what we end up taking that really showcase what's going on. And your goal in this meeting is to get that final approval. And that final approval is just, it's great. But you will get that if you seriously use change management along the way and make sure you're matching everything up through your mission, vision, and values of the organization. And then what you'll want to do after it's approved is go back. Now let's present it to the division. This is not going to look different to them. It's not going to look new because throughout this process, you've kept them in the loop. Emails were great too. People respond in emails throughout. So make sure you're keeping that team constantly involved. So, but review the goals and strategies and objectives and set timeline for your current year. Really make sure you're holding to it. Make sure the owners really understand what their role is. Please make sure change management is done for every single objective. You have to think who's impacted, and you have to think about how you're going to process through involving those impacted. They need to be there from the moment you start conversations of the objectives. Have regular meetings. Where are you? Review that progress. Adjust timelines if you need them. It's okay. Okay. You might have to do that if new things come up, but use that ad card process because it's very important that you have that awareness and desire to be able to do knowledge and get people on board. Your role as a leader, you have a very, very, very important role throughout this. You probably saw. You need to help make sure that you keep people on task, that you keep change management in the forefront. If you see or hear or think that people aren't being involved that should, you need to help people recognize that. Please make sure you mention change management. Talk about what change management is. Some people are like, whatever, about change management. They are. But once you really dabble in it, it works great. Change management does take time. People think, well, that will take too long. Well, what takes longer is doing things twice, or doing things over, or having things fail, or having things you start and you did all that work and then nothing happens at the end. That's when it actually takes more time to not use change management. So please make sure you do that as a leader. Ensure you use it all the time yourself. Ensure you have champions that can actually lead the goal and make sure they have the tools to do it. You need to help make sure that they actually can do what you're asking them. And if they can't, help make sure you break down the barriers and give them the tools and time to do it. And then reinforce the sustained change throughout. When things start getting implemented, are you making sure it's really happening? And are you making sure if there's resistance that you're helping listen to that to make sure you mitigate that throughout? That is so important for you to be able to do. All right, I think I had 50 minutes. Hope I didn't rush through that too fast. But definitely open for any questions people may have at all. I don't know if you want me to stop sharing my screen for that, but happy to do that. I will. I'll stop sharing.
Yep, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you'd like to come off of mute, you can ask them directly as well.
Oh, I need to stop sharing. Stop sharing. Oh my goodness, I'm big. Yeah, there's anything on the side, happy to help. Let's see. Hopefully, with you think about strategic planning, the first time you do it, I don't know if do any of you do strategic planning right now? Put in the chat if you do. Yeah. Those that work here do. I know that. Erica Allman better say yes. Rachel, yep, Rachel, you're right. Oh, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, so good. Hopefully, hi, Christy. So hopefully you see that strategic planning is very important. But one thing I hope you have actually gained from there too. Do you guys use a lot of change management when you do projects and ensure that you have the right people at the table do you feel everyone uses change management? I will say no. I'll say even where I work, not everyone uses change management in their stuff and in what they do. And that's where things can be difficult when you find out things later, right? Yeah, I agree with you. I think we try, but I think people feel time sensitive, right? Yeah, Danielle, I agree. I think people forget that change management is a key for you to really get to that end result. And when you don't use it, it actually takes you more time because now you have to go back constantly and start making changes. So I agree with you. So, all right. Yes, you know what? Schedules. We totally run into that, right? So, if you run into schedule thing, especially physicians and division chiefs, that can absolutely be a schedule. So you know what? Then you have to think outside the box. We've done stuff where we've done it virtually through emails to say, okay, read this. What are your thoughts? Tell me more. People usually can find time to get on an email and respond back. A Teams channel. I don't know if you guys use Teams where you are, but we've used Teams channel where you're like, you just put like a quick little thing in there. Hey, take a look at this, and people can make changes right in Teams. So there's ways to do change management. Oh my gosh, I agree with you. I love Teams. I don't know about y'all, but I do. It does. Have any of you hit roadblocks that you've hit and you wonder how to get through when you've done strategic planning, or you've maybe even done a project and you've hit roadblocks? Oh, yeah. So I would say no, Nicole. I would absolutely say no. I think even smaller changes. The thing with smaller changes is I would say why things don't change is change management no matter what. If people are going to have to do any change at all, as long as you have in those smaller changes, let's say it's only going to be 2 departments, right? Because sometimes that's it. It's 2 departments that need to work together. But do you have the right people? Sometimes what happens instead is just the 2 leaders get together. And when those 2 leaders get together, they make the decision. But have you made sure when you implement that change, who actually has to do the change? You have to make sure the person who has to do the change is involved. So this is where I say it's key that you go, all right, well, if we're going to implement a new temperature, a thermometer in our practice, well, who has to use that? Nursing assistants, nurses. So do you have a nurse and a nursing assistant at the table with you to have the conversations on what thermometer you're going to use? That's where you have to use that, if that makes sense. Does that help a little bit, Nicole? So I would say always use change management. Make sure, because I think all of you have had products come out and you're like, why didn't they ask us if this would work? This is not going to work. Or why did they ask how that flow would work? That totally interrupts our flow of nursing, or that totally interrupts our flow. That's why you need to have somebody at the table with you that actually has to do the work. That's what change management is. Yeah, and we like to push it out. So many times. Correct. Yes. We can record things and people go back and read it. I love that part. I love that you do the recording. And pushing out more than 3 years, what's so key then is you never don't have a 5-year plan. Because, right? Because if you have a 5-year ongoing plan, then year 2 becomes year 1, and you're pulling out of that 5-year plan to now create year 2, and then you're adding more to your 5-year one, and that 5-year goes out another year. So it's just a constant evolving thing. So that's where it's really important to do that. But any other questions? But yeah, I highly encourage you, no matter how small or how big a project, just make sure you ask yourself, so things don't fail, who's impacted? Who's impacted? Who will touch it? And have them at the table from the moment you start talking about it. That would be the best one. Yes, Danielle. Yes. Yep, Danielle, I agree. You have to do that. Change management, you have to understand it, and you need to do all the steps, 100%. And once you start getting in it, I became a ProSide champion. I went to a 5-day course and got certified in it. And it seems like it's common sense, but it's not. it's hard. It's easy to do, but hard to do, right? Because you have to be open to mitigating resistance. And I will tell you what people are like, I can't believe how many people threw so much at you. And I'm like, I love it. They're like, what? Like, what? And I'm like, yeah, because now I know what will prevent them from wanting to do it. I know how to now communicate differently with it, how to write my next messaging out so I can mitigate that resistance and start creating their desire, because they just told me all the reasons they don't want to do it. And now I'm going to create desire off of it. That's how you do it. And so getting that resistance is absolutely key. You want them to tell you every reason they're not going to want to do it, because you know how to respond back to help create the desire to get them there. So I would say that's important. But yeah, I could talk change management forever. So I will start wrapping it up, because that is my passion, is to ensure people are involved in anything that affects them. And strategic planning is a big one for that. So, well, thank you guys.
That concludes the online education. I would like to thank all of our presenters for their experience, knowledge, and expertise. Be sure to subscribe so you're up to date with all of Nebraska Methodist College's continuing education offerings. Thank you.